Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. Now, if you've been following my writing over the last, couple years, there has been a divide in the North Dakota Republican Party. And that's not news. There's a divide in the Republican Party nationally. There are things changing. Things are realigning. And it's creating a struggle. The definition of what is and is not a conservative is changing. For a lot of people now, I'm not a conservative anymore. That's just the way the world is turning. But anyway, the way this story has broken down in North Dakota over the last few months is that the North Dakota Republican Party. Earlier this year, we saw a new chair be elected. It was a contested election. The previous chairman, Perry Schaefer, was defeated by a vote of the district chair. If you don't understand how this works, essentially what happens is members of the Republican Party who have paid their dues can show up at local district conventions in the legislative districts that they live in. They can then elect basically a committee of people led by a district chairman to oversee that committee, and then those district chairs in turn are part of what's called the state committee in the North Dakota Republican Party, and then they choose leaders for the statewide party, including the chair of the North Dakota Republican Party. So in that election, we have seen sort of I don't know what you want to call them, the populist right, the Bastiat, whatever you want to call them, sort of very Trump aligned. They have been taking over districts in the Republican Party. They had enough district chairs to elect one of their own as party chair, Sandi Sanford. She is the new NDGOP party chair. And so since that has happened, we have seen large dollar donors get refunds of their donations from the party. We have seen the cash on hand for the state party start to drop. Now, I have been cautious in saying it's early going. Sometimes party fundraising goes up and down. Maybe this is a real problem or a real trend. Maybe it's not. I view it as it looks problematic, but time will tell. But last night, we had some additional breaking news. We had the executive director of the North Dakota Republican Party, Samantha Holly, who's been on the job about 9 months now. I think you were hired in January, roughly 9 months, announced her resignation. I published a story about it. Her full letter is in there, but in the letter, she was talking about obstacles to continue doing her job. So I wanted to bring her on the show and talk about that. Sam, how you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Tell us, why'd you make this decision? And by the way, I'm doing good as well. Yes. So.
Well, good. Thank you. Yeah. And thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. So overall, my decision to leave, it's been a long process of trying to, decide if that's the best way to move forward. And I told her when she got elected or before she got elected. And I told, I've always been very open about, I'm here for the party. I'm not tied to a chair. I've now worked under 3 chairmen. And I just, I've always prided myself on, being very fair to everyone. Obviously we have a split in the party. Obviously there are always going to be people that, you don't like that they got the endorsement, or you don't necessarily support, that their race, but being at the party, you have to put kind of all your personal feelings behind you and just, make the job of the party is to elect Republicans. And I think the party has done a very good job at that, given we're a super majority. So I've always been very open about, I am happy to work with whoever, as long as their best interest is for the party, I'm willing and able to continue to do my job no matter who is my boss. It's just, so the meeting in June happened. Perry lost, Sandi won, and I was more than willing to keep going with that. And things, we transitioned her very well. It was my first chair transition, so it was probably not as smooth as others, but I think we did a pretty good job. And things, we started right off the bat going to an RNC meeting, and all was all was great. And I was actually really excited to see maybe a change. Nothing against Perry, but maybe a change in leadership, would kind of bring the party together. I don't know, it's something had to change, so maybe that would help. But just as the last few weeks specifically, but just kind of from the get-go, it was very obvious that, keeping me was the smart decision, but it probably wasn't the decision that she wanted. And I completely understand that, and that's fine, but it's been very apparent to me through various, people hearing things that people say, specific actions at work, just it's very obvious that my position is being carved out and kind of spread around to other people, including the executive committee and other committees. And it's been to the point now where like the communication to me is so 50-50, to where there are decisions and meetings being made without me and without my knowledge, and the only way I hear about certain things is through email. And they're not big things, but committees and this and this, it's just like suddenly I get an email and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that.
Sam, let me jump in here and say, so for context for listeners, you were a paid employee of the North Dakota Republican Party, whereas when we're talking about the chair, Sandi Sanford currently, and previously Perry Schaefer, that is a volunteer position elected by members of the North Dakota GOP district chairs and such across the state. So there's an important distinction there. To your knowledge or to your feeling, when Sandi Sanford was elected chair, was there a sense that she came in and said, okay, this is, I am elected chair, and as such, I would like to bring in my people, somewhat similar to a new governor or president taking over an administration comes in and says, I'm going to appoint the cabinet people, which most people say, okay, you were elected. And in this case, as you just acknowledged, Sandi was elected and you were willing to serve. Was it expressed to you explicitly that she'd like to come in and bring in her own people?
No, it wasn't explicitly. Right off the bat, it was, she had talked about, just for, messaging purposes and just kind of having her core group of people that she trusts. They never came in, I don't think. I don't know who that group is, but she had said that she was, talking, just kind of working on some messaging stuff right off the bat. But other than that, no.
How many employees does the North Dakota Republican Party have right now, for context?
We have two, me and then another staff member.
So this is this is a small group of folks. So it would be it's not as if, and I know this is already inherently apparent to you, Sam, but for listeners, it's not like there's a large bureaucracy here, or it's not like the governor's office, for instance, where I don't know how many appointees North Dakota governor has, but I think it's hundreds maybe, but and cabinet members. So this is a very small group of people. Do you plan on having any official interaction with the North Dakota GOP going forward, or what kind of are your thoughts moving from here?
Well, if you're talking about, next steps or, my interests, I am not leaving politics. I love politics, and I've always been very open about, loved this job. I always joked that, the turnover rate was a little high, and I get that because some people just go with chairs, and that's, it's a different climate every year. But I always joked that I loved it so much I would retire there as executive director. And so I don't want to go away, and I don't know. I don't have a next plan at this point, but I do want to stay involved. I'm pretty well involved in my district at this point. And so I definitely want to stay somewhere in politics. I'm not, writing off the NDGOP whatsoever. No, at the end of the day, I still care about the party. I still want it to go well. I don't want us to get into this weird battle that I think the U.S. is headed, where both parties are they're getting so radical. There's just a bunch of people in the middle that are kind of lost, like, oh, where do we fit in? And so I think I don't want to lose Republicans in that way. And want to keep our state red. So yes, absolutely, I will still be around. I just don't know in what capacity.
Sam, one of the things that when this news broke last night and I was writing about it and you gave me a statement, one of the things you said was that there were meetings and decisions being made that you were not privy to, and you said, I quote, "I ultimately needed to resign from my executive director position because I continuously felt that I was not able to perform the duties I was initially hired to do." Can you give us some examples or some specifics? Expand on that.
Yeah, so the executive director, I kind of feel as though, it's kind of like an operations manager where, you kind of oversee everything. You don't necessarily, we have someone doing comms and data stuff, but it's kind of an oversee, that kind of thing. And that's, what I experienced. Corby Kimmer was the last executive director, and that's kind of how we operated. Was he would talk directly to Perry. It's not, Perry would talk to me as well. It's not like he had to be the middleman, but it was just a nice flow of, Perry and Corby would make their plans for the party together and be very much on the same page. And then whatever information I needed trickled down to me to do my job. And so that's kind of how I've continued to do my job. And there have been multiple occasions where essentially my approval of things seems to have been taken away, like even things so small as like getting quotes for projects that we want to do. And now I have to have it approved by another executive committee member when it's purely more operational, office centered. It's not an executive committee decision.
Why do you think that why do you think that was happening?
I have my personal reasons as to why I think it was happening. And I guess I can that's what I said at the beginning. I think that my position me as executive director was needed to get the ball rolling, get, all the information, catch her up to speed, that kind of thing. But now that that's happened, it's kind of just feeling like they're positioning me to have they were positioning me to have a very easy out, and positioning it in a sense that like she could easily bring someone in, because it was two individuals in particular on the executive committee they're very involved in operations and staff tasks. And that's not been, to me, that's not what an executive board should be. And so it's kind of like they're taking over my position. And so that was one thing. Other things would be, the finances. I know that's a hot topic and I don't want to, dive too much into that, but just things like, I just drew a blank. The finances. Just, things like budgets, and when I became executive director, I sat down very early on in January with the treasurer and the chair of the party, Perry and Nick Hacker. And we sat down and spent 3 hours laying out a plan for 2 years. This is what we had budgeted for certain things, knowing our plans. And there were multiple times that I brought up that we needed to do that. And it just like, nothing I said really, it was like, oh yeah, we'll get there. And then it just, kind of sloughed off. And another thing is the trust. I feel like I've never had both Sandi and the executive committee's trust fully. I think they always kind of had in the back of their head that, she's not going to really help us. She's going to, go running back to Perry and that kind of thing. And that wasn't the case. And it's just the trust there. I felt that it wasn't. Yeah.
Sam, normally I would almost consider this to be a gotcha question, but at this point,
great.
I'm sorry, but but it has to be asked right now because this is involving directly decision makers and elected officials in our state. At this point, it feels explicit to me, but you had a much more direct and front row seat to this. Do you feel that Sandi Sanford, as the current chair, and the people who are supporting her are trying to organize challenges to sitting GOP members in North Dakota to replace them or have place candidates in primaries next year to more align with their philosophy in 2024?
Yeah. So I do I know that that's happening with people. I will say, I don't think Sandi has a part in that. And I really don't think she was, working, with the farther, the Bastiat caucus. I think it worked out to where the Bastiat caucus wanted to unseat Perry, and they were looking for the person that had the highest, likelihood of taking over. And so to answer, I don't think she became chair to completely just push the Bastiat agenda. I really don't. I do know that those things are happening. Again, not with Sandi, but in districts and executive committees of districts and that kind of thing. I know
but my question isn't on nowhere, because she explicitly posted someone should primary Kelly Armstrong, which I'm sorry to add my commentary to, but was there any more talk like that as chair when you were experienced being executive director with her?
No. So that subject in particular, her asking for a primary challenger for Kelly, that was brought up not in a sense of, yes, we need to do that, but in a sense of, I just don't know where that's coming from her point of view. I've never seen the actual post, but I will say, I think she could really push back a little more on the people that are doing that, because a lot of leaders in the party have been alerted to specific examples of even district chairs formulating their own groups to unseat current Republicans. Like, they've been very, very candid about that in their groups, and I've heard that and seen that and read it. And so I don't know if that is her initial, that's why she got involved, and that's why she ran for chair. However, I do think there are things that she and a lot of the other leaders know are happening, and they're just kind of choosing not to.
Well, let me
do anything about it.
Let me ask you a question, because I've done a lot of reporting on this, and
really?
one or two things.
Oh,
and so one thing I want to ask, because I suspect you mentioned a couple of people who have gotten really involved, and I suspect I know their names. I suspect one is Jay Lundeen. I suspect another is Mike Blessum, who are a couple of Minot area Republican activists, both of whom have been, they're not working behind the scenes in terms of taking on incumbent Republicans. Jay Lundeen presided over a censure of longtime state senator in his own district, Karen Kresbach, state senator, called her a Democrat. She's been getting elected as a Republican in North Dakota since the Reagan administration. He is a key supporter of Sandi Sanford's. Mike Blessum is another key supporter of Sandi Sanford. He is out promoting a legislative scorecard for Republican lawmakers, that basically gives them a low score if they vote for a bill alongside a Democrat. Well, anybody knows how North Dakota's legislature works. There's a lot of bills. First of all, North Dakota's Democrats are, maybe nobody wants to hear this, pretty conservative. Like, if you want to talk about the scale of like left-right, North Dakota Democrats are probably to the right of a lot of their counterparts in other states. They're going to vote like on things like ag policy. They're going to vote with Republicans a lot of time. So I guess what I'm saying is these are two people, and I'm having, I'm just on the outside looking in, but it's hard. Like these are the people that elected Sanford. Lundeen was. Blessum didn't have a vote on the state committee, but Lundeen was one of the votes. They are her key supporters. And so I don't know how you can extricate their aim, which is they want to, they're going to spend more time campaigning against Republicans this election cycle than they do Democrats. And her, tenure as the chair of the state party. I don't know how you can, and I'm not asking you for the answers. You were there because you just wanted to serve the party. You're doing your best. You're trying to figure out, like, where are we going to get our campaign signs printed this year, right? Stuff like that. Yeah. So I understand that. But from the outside looking in, we're looking at this saying, this is a mess. This is an absolute mess. And I don't know. You said she could push back harder. Yeah. The people who are supporting her are the ones doing this stuff. That's how it looks like to us.
Yeah. And I know you said I didn't need to, answer the question, but it does make me sad, because I know that there are, you mentioned Jay by name and Mike. It's like I think we're all calling for unity, but yet these things are still happening behind the scenes, and it's just
and not
it's kind
so
of
behind the scenes. I mean, it was
well, no, not at
Yeah.
this point, it's not. Yeah, and
It's
it's
not
just
behind the scenes of the district I live in either. There's a new
yeah.
chair, and he pretty much explicitly dislikes one of the Republican incumbents who's in the House seat. I mean, there's no.
Yep. And that's where it's frustrating to me because you know, people can call for unity all they want, but it's very obvious that they only want it when it works in their favor, you know, or to make someone else look bad. And it sucks to me because I think there's people on the Bastiat side that I really enjoy and I've really enjoyed working with. I think they're very smart. And I just wish that they truly wanted unity. And I know that's that's just a dream. I know that's rainbows and butterflies. We're not ever all going to get along and be singing, you know, holding hands. But I think there is a point where you have to decide, okay, yeah, maybe you don't like this legislator, but instead of actively, you know, trying to unseat them, potentially getting a Democrat in because the Republican vote split, who knows, you know, it's anyone's game. I wish that there was a way that that some certain people would just try to work together. And I understand you're not going to like everybody. I mean, I don't even like my boyfriend sometimes. I'm kidding. If he's listening to this.
Whoa, breaking news.
Breaking news. No, I'm kidding, Jacob. But it's like, you know, we don't always get along, and it doesn't mean I'm gonna try to go out and make his life, you know, miserable and try to make sure I can't unseat him from boyfriend status, I guess.
Well,
but you know, it's like
but there is no purity
there's no
pure enough for the
compromise.
self-peer frequently.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
now in
it's
this
true.
version of politics, we are
Mhm.
unfortunately reached that point. And I've seen it.
Mhm.
I've seen it on both sides thing. But right now in North Dakota, the GOP is the dominant party, and their schisms are that much more public and explicit. I'm wondering, Sam, you had mentioned that your duties as executive director, one of two employees for the North Dakota Republican Party, had been sort of dissipated into the volunteer committee. I'm wondering if you know, real insider baseball here, is it your sense that Sandi Sanford, as the relatively new chair, is simply going to go without an executive director and put more of the decision-making and day-to-day operations into a volunteer capacity? Or do you think that she will try and hire another executive director more in line with her political philosophy?
I think she'll hire somebody else. Like I said,
Who is it? Do you know?
I have my thoughts that I don't want to say right now.
Name names.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I don't think it's going to become a, you know, just kind of leaving the operations to the executive committee. I think there will be an ED, and I know from various conversations, you know, like politics, everyone talks. It's, you know, people, you can't trust anyone these days. But I do know that she specifically was wanting me gone. So I think there's already been plans to replace me.
You know, I know you mentioned earlier you didn't want to delve too deep into the finances, but there's not, from those of us on the outside looking in, there's not a lot of metrics that we can, you know, like data that we can point to other than like finances. I know the cash on hand's been going down. I know there's obviously been some big dollar donors, a handful of them that have, you know, asked for their refunds, got their money back. I mean, Republicans listening to this, do they need to be worried about the finances of the state party?
I don't think the decrease. So in our staff meetings, obviously we've kind of compared years past. And again, I'm just speaking for the party, for the good of the party. There is a decline, and it's, you know, it's obvious, but compared to 2021, where, you know, the last off year, it seems kind of like it's similar. So I don't want to say people need to be worried the NDGOP is failing, you know, this and this, because it's not. However, I do think that it's kind of, I think the NDGOP now, not us, but me, or not me, but them, I think they need to really start focusing on the major donor dollars. And I understand that, you know, you don't want the party funded by 5 people, But at the same time, to have a successful party, you do have to have those kind of dollars coming in. And it worries me that it's September and none of the major donors, as far as I know, have been contacted.
And to be clear, that is not typical, even in an off-year cycle, because I do know at some times campaigns and political parties can even run deficits intentionally to try and create a effective campaign result with a fundraising intent later, or some explicit plan put in place. But you're saying this is not planned. These are unexpected financial hits for the party.
Yep. Yeah, they are for sure. And I think it's I think it's fixable. I really do. But I just think,
well, to me, that's why I kind of felt it was a story, because I'm certainly aware that the parties, especially in the off year, they run in the red sometimes, right? They build up a stockpile during the election year. And also like having two staff come election year, you're going to probably hire a few more. There's going to be obviously a lot more volunteers who kick in. It's the nature of the cyclical beast. I guess the reason why it kind of jumped out to me as a story now is this is happening. There's obviously big dollar donors who are upset. And you have this schism. And so whether or not the party can maintain its previous level of finance, to me, that is a very interesting ongoing story that is pertinent. And like you said, it's fixable. Maybe they'll right the ship. I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of dysfunction right now, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. And I really think, so the donors, it's their choice whether they want to give or not. It's their money. If they don't believe in it, that's their choice. But I think at least knowing that they probably won't give, it doesn't matter. They should still be contacted. And I've tried to kind of push that. It's like, well, we should contact them at least, and yeah, it's an off year. So typically maybe you wouldn't contact them or push so hard for money. But I just feel like with the new change in leadership, and not only just the chair, but the entire executive committee, I think reaching out and having at least a conversation with them would mean something, because their minds can be changed. They can, if they see the value in it, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if they see the value in it, they will give. It's not always just this, oh, you're on this side. Nope.
Sam, you've had a front row seat to the political goings on of the dominant political party here in North Dakota. Now you're leaving, and you started in January of this year, and you were, I assume, very involved in politics previous to that. Is there anything that you would like the general public that pays attention, and maybe not necessarily Republican, Democrat, whichever, just folks who pay attention to policymakers in their state? Is there anything from, not like scandalous, but like something behind the scenes or like a pattern you're seeing that you'd like more people to know about, that's part of why you're making the move you've made right now, which is to leave your position as an executive director to a job you, as you described previously, absolutely loved?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I've always wished that voters knew more is just don't stop. They need to stop believing everything they hear, because it's, or reading a headline, no offense to media, but it's just what I've found in the last couple of years is people will read a headline or they will be told something and they just immediately believe it, and it's like, oh my gosh, and then they tell their friends, and it's this and this and this. And one thing in particular that really kind of made me mad the last couple of years is all of this stuff, that people would say about Perry, and it would just be, not to bring him into this, but that was a specific example of, they'd be like, well, he said this, that's absolutely not right. And I'm like, yeah, he did say that, but where's the rest of the context? You don't know why he said that. You don't know what was going on behind the scenes. All you heard is that he said this about your friend, and now suddenly you have 18 other people hating him. And it's just, there's so many false narratives out there that I just wish people would do their research and talk to people, and don't just talk to, the people in your group. I encourage people to branch out and just, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And at the end of the day, if you hear both sides and you still want to go with the one side you initially, believed, that's totally fine. But I think just this one-sided narrative on all sides of the
Yeah.
party, but just in politics in general, it needs to stop. And I don't know how to stop it, but there is just so much misinformation out there.
Well, I think and not, I mean, listen, not we, those of us who work in, I guess, the traditional media, are not perfect either. I understand that, but
yeah,
but I think in this context,
volunteer podcast host though, perfect every time.
Yeah, perfect every time.
It's
That's
amazing.
Right.
It's impeccable.
Wow.
Wow. All
Incredible.
right. Clearly, I need to do Ben's evaluation, but I think what you're talking about, because let's face it, the news media is not covering a lot of this down in the weeds. There's one person who's covering it in depth, and that's me. Outside of that, a lot of it is social media. How much of a problem, how much of this gets started because some rando says something on Facebook, and then it gets shared, and then people comment, and everybody takes, because they already don't want to like a person. They take everything, at face value. And I think that's really unfortunate. I think that's a phenomena that we're and it's a much bigger, that's a microcosm. That goes all the way up to the top.
Yeah,
it does. It is such a problem. Well, Samantha, you gave us a half hour of your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on and talking and helping give us a view behind the curtain. I think the public deserves to know. To Ben's point, this is the dominant political party in North Dakota. Most of the people who are in elected office in North Dakota overwhelmingly are Republicans. And so understanding what's going on in this party right now and what's happening among Republicans, because there's some big splits, and I don't know how we bridge them, but it's a tough thing. But Samantha, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Well, that was a very interesting interview. And listen, I understand. I really want to... Samantha Holly, obviously, she's beholden of her own ideology. She has her own view on the issue. She's a human being, and generally a conservative person because she's working for the Republican Party. But, setting all that aside, there's a certain professionalism when you work in that sort of a role in the party, right? She's working for the good of the party. A lot of the ideological differences and everything else, not her job. She's a professional. And so for somebody who understands that role the way she does, right? She talked about wanting to be a lifer in the Republican Party. She liked that role. She wanted to, she served under multiple chairs. She wanted to serve under multiple chairs in the future. Doing that means accepting that there's going to be ideological swings from chair to chair. There's going to be differences in priorities or what have you. And that speaks to somebody who just wants to be a professional and wants to focus on the retail.
And wants to support what in her mind is the home team, which is the North Dakota GOP.
Sure. And there's nothing wrong with that. For someone like her to feel like to speak up, I think is remarkable.
And within the North Dakota political world, it's actually shocking. If you told me this 10 years ago, I'm still a little blown away. But
the state Republican Party, the most successful political organization. The most successful political organization in state history, right? I think there's no question about it. It's having these problems right now.
10 years ago, we had a Democratic United States senator and more Democrats elected in the legislature. So actually, the GOP has become more successful than 10 years ago and are splintering as badly as I can't imagine the last time the North Dakota GOP was splintering this badly. I can point to you where this happened with the Democratic Party. It happened in the primary for governor in 1992. That was the election where Ed Schaefer became governor after a long string of Democrat governors, and that's oftentimes pointed to on the Dem NPL side as the point where the party started to shrink. I wonder if the North Dakota GOP isn't headed for a 1992 style
I've thought
primary.
that same thing. And what's remarkable to me, I think you're right. History repeats itself. I feel like, who was the name of the guy who ran in the primary? I forget his name. It was
Nick Spaeth versus.
Nick Spaeth, that's right.
He was the attorney general versus.
I knew that. Yep.
Oh, darn it. I'm forgetting the name, but it was two people who within the North Dakota Democratic Party were considered um, competent real candidates. One of them was a state legislator and one of them was an attorney general. And I don't think either was particularly spouting. I think the thing was neither of them had like a big policy difference between each other. It was viewed as kind of a contest of personalities, and I think that left a bad taste in people's mouths.
Yeah.
And Ed Schaefer was a good, hardworking candidate.
I think the difference what's going on now, and it's kind of remarkable because it's a bunch of people who are upset with the Republican Party, and if you look at what the Republican Party has been doing, how much more successful could they possibly be? And I understand success isn't just measured in electing office. It's also measured in are the policies that I prefer being passed. But I think there's this expectation among these sort of populist hard right people. I hate even calling them hard right because in a lot of ways, I don't even think they're particularly conservative. A lot of the stuff that they propose is very big government stuff. But
very big government stuff, but unfortunately, and I hate using this political science freshman student term, but please feel my eyes roll over the audio.
I can see them. I can attest his eyes are rolling.
The Overton window that's being moved by these folks is turning that into the definition of what hard right is. They're pretty okay with big government. They're pretty okay with spending money.
The Overton window, by the way, if people aren't aware of this, it was named after a gentleman who worked for frankly, a right of center nonprofit called the Mackinac Center out of Michigan. And essentially the Overton window is the window of all the political positions that are valid, I want to say, or sustainable or acceptable in a given moment. So 50 years ago, being in favor of legalizing marijuana, for instance, would have been way outside the being in favor of legalizing same-sex marriage would have been way outside the window. Those things are obviously very much in the window now because the window moved. That's what the concept is when we talk about that. So I guess
it's used by a lot of people who induce eye rolls.
The difference,
so I hate evoking it.
I think the difference between what happened to the North Dakota Democrats in the 90s, to the extent that obviously I was 12, so I can't claim a lot of firsthand experience, but from my understanding of it versus today, in the 90s, I think what happened was it disillusioned a lot of Democrats with their party, and they stopped showing up. Now, some of that's going on, but because basically you had a very ugly primary process, a lot of people got disillusioned, and they just kind of checked out. I think what's happening here, the same thing's happening to Republicans. They're getting disillusioned and checked out, but what's happening is because there's these strident ideologues, and even that term doesn't apply because it's hard when it's not even really a coherent, it's a mood really, even more than a coherent ideology. But you have these very strident people who it's like you either have the same mood that I do about the direction of our state and our party in the country, or you're out.
There's another element that's similar to that I just thought of to what we're talking about with the Democrats splitting during a primary and eventually having their party shrink, because there's multiple factors to any dominant political party shrinking, but there's a chilling one that I just realized is similar. In the 90s, as is everywhere, there was a big rise in like more conservative voices in the media, AM radio, more nationalized, I would call it more nationalized politics, a strive away from the big three, ABC, CBS, NBC, as the main or only source of television news. And there's a similar phenomenon now where even that ecosystem has been disrupted by an online, what they would consider to be right-wing movement that's very much in Donald Trump's shadow. Reddit, 4chan, this very, and I would call them fact-free.
Well, I mean, when you look at like somehow Andrew Tate, who, I mean, is not somebody I pursue, but he's an influencer. Like he wields a lot of influence over the sort of Trumpist right. I'm not sure that the things that he espouses are even specifically political. Like I've never heard him. I mean, and I don't spend a lot of time listening to Andrew Tate, but to my knowledge, he doesn't exactly have like a nuanced position on like Social Security or Medicare or the national budget. He's got a lot of stuff about like
what
women.
should we do about the Bank of North Dakota, that kind of thing.
Right.
And in years past, someone with his profile would have zero probably influence or even fans in a place like North Dakota, just because there wasn't a publicly consumed internet for people to see those things. So it wasn't a factor.
So
now you're going into these district conventions where people are coming with that philosophy, when truly what they're doing is nominating someone to vote on the PERS
Right.
budget, the North Dakota Public
well,
Employees
and again,
Healthcare
what they're coming
plan.
with, it's not a philosophy, it's not an ideology, it's a mood. And I think that's how Andrew Tate fits in. He brings a mood to it, right? Like he's got
Just hashtag vibes.
Right. Like he's got a vibe around him, and that vibe is, I'm going to do what I want, and who cares about anybody else? And it's, I mean, frankly, a lot of it's misogyny.
Yeah, and I actually don't know about Andrew Tate specifically, because I saw some headlines and I was
Tucker
like,
Carlson.
I think I don't want to know about that guy. But Tucker Carlson, yeah.
I mean,
those
there's a
guys.
lot of them that are kind of in that like very weird. And Tucker Carlson obviously has far more political and has a long journalism career that frankly at one point I respected. I respected him as a writer. I respected him as a reporter. I thought he was an important voice, even if I didn't always agree with him. And now I think he's become a caricature. He's terrible. Anyway, we're talking about all this stuff. This stuff.
What does this hold? I mean, does this have direct consequences on the future elections with the North Dakota GOP? And if it does, I would say the only direction it could go, I mean, truly, the North Dakota GOP, I think the only place they have to go electorally is down, not at any fault of their own. I don't think you could get many more offices under your belt.
I don't know. How do you, I mean, there's
what they're doing.
There's 4 Senate seats left that Republicans don't hold. So, and those 4 are elected in some pretty blue districts.
So
I don't know how.
Even the House members are in the same.
I mean, unless you're going to get a bunch of college professors around one of the universities to suddenly become Republicans, I don't know how you're going to unseat them.
And the only way you could be, there's 2 ways it could go about. I would think naturally, even Democrats could pick up, even if they picked up 5 seats in each chamber. That on paper sounds like a real winner of an election. Hilariously, that barely makes a dent in their percentages.
I mean, that could have happened. And by the way, Democrats could see, I mean, they've hit rock. I mean, and this is not me being mean. They've hit rock bottom. The Democrats don't have anywhere to go
electoral representation, they've hit rock bottom.
And so just cyclical, like even a 100% united, organized, competently managed Republican Party was probably going to see some attrition. Just due to the natural cycles of politics.
But there is something there when you look at the U.S. Senate race last year, and Katrina Christensen does beat Rick Becker, who is not just a Bastiat. He's the main guy behind their movement.
He's the Trump. He's the Donald Trump for the populist right in North Dakota.
And she beat him, and I believe beat him handily. Now she lost handily to John Hoeven.
They both lost in a landslide to Hoeven.
But is there something there that someone with just Rick Becker's profile? Now he was running without the advantage of the R behind his last name, and that is a big deal when it comes to just checking the box on election day. But is there something there where at some point, is it just a slow uptick in Democratic seats in the legislature? I'd imagine we'd have that. I frankly very much hope we have that. I know Republicans who hope we have that. But is there going to be a big,
I wonder if there's, I mean, I think there's going to be some attrition.
Statewide office. Is it going to be like a Heidi camp in 2012? Is the governor's seat? I mean, I'm wondering how safe
I was just going to
Burgum is to run for a 3rd term.
I was just going to ask you. I think, well, first of all, I think he's very safe. I think that first of all, being the R on the ticket is important. I think he's done a good job overall.
Very important. Very important.
And so I don't think he's going to have a problem. I don't think he's going to go to the convention. I don't think he's going to do what Hoeven did and take that risk, because he's going to get booed. And the party, I mean, let's face it, the leadership of his party is hostile to him right now. There is, it's an open secret that the reason why Sandi Sanford's husband, Brent Sanford, left the ticket was because Governor Burgum got tired of the constant, recrimination from Sandi Sanford on social media and everywhere else. She wasn't on the team. That created things. Things were awkward for Brent. He moved on. And I say that I think Brent Sanford's a fine public servant and a fine human being and a great person. And I'm not saying that Sandi Sanford's not a good human being. I disagree with a lot of her motivations. But I mean, but this is the scenario I wanted to lay out for you. Like, Okay, so you're looking, the North Dakota Republican Party is divided. You have this sort of populist faction that's out on the right flank of Republican candidates like Kelly Armstrong, like Doug Burgum. Let's say Doug Burgum doesn't run for a third term, right? Because Doug also brings, the enormous amount of money that he's not shy about spending money on his political ambitions. Let's say he doesn't run for a third term, which is a possibility. I think he's going to, but he might not.
I strongly feel he will.
Now suddenly maybe a Kelly now it's an open seat race. You don't have an incumbent. Maybe a Kelly Armstrong runs in. Kelly's very formidable, no question about it.
And he's been explicit that he's interested in it.
But do these divides in the Republican Party draw somebody like Heidi Heitkamp in?
To run in the yeah.
I mean, because that's the other part of the equation is in order for Democrats to go up, it can't just be. I think North Dakota voters are going to continue, even if they're becoming disillusioned with Republicans and frustrated with Republicans, I think a lot of them are going to keep voting for Republicans until Democrats give them a reason to vote a different way.
Well, and something that Democrats, it's not as if it was the Democratic Party's choice. And it wasn't, Earl Pomeroy or Kent Conrad or Byron Dorgan, the old federal delegation's choice. But one of the reasons I think you had a party that wound up atrophying is because we haven't had the governorship. The Democrats haven't had a governorship in a very, very long time. And when you're a governor, you get to make appointments. And when you're governor, you are based in the state and you're head of the political party in your state. And it allows you to do things and talk about successes as you view them that are localized. Whereas a federal delegation, a federal member is talking about things that are going on in Washington, D.C. Well, guess what? Everybody's talking about what's going on in Washington, D.C. You're one of, 500, however many pundits that day that are talking about that. But when you're, in the case of Doug Burgum, he clearly likes, for an example of a project in my backyard, the soybean crushing plant that's coming to Castleton. He loves that. He was there at the announcement. He was doing and this isn't throwing shade at him. This is every elected official for all time. He was there almost, he wasn't saying he was taking credit for it, but he was celebrating it as a success under his administration. How much he gets credit for that is up to the individual voter and everybody. That's an everybody thing, Democrats, Republicans.
See, that's sort
but
of,
if you had
a
Democrat governor, if you had a Democrat governor talking about successes in North Dakota or successes that they're doing, that allows the kind of party building that the North Dakota GOP had under Ed Schaefer in 92 onward. It's what allowed the Democrats to get where they were in the federal delegation after the 60s because of Bill Guy being governor for 12 years and being able to tour the state and talk to people and folks knowing in their mind the Democratic Party was Bill Guy and it was Quentin Burdick. It wasn't JFK.
I mean, there's so many problems. I mean, the North Dakota Democratic Party became defined by, as politics got nationalized, became defined by their national party, which frankly is out of step. The National Democratic Party doesn't prioritize a lot of things that are important to North Dakotans.
But now the Republican Party in North Dakota has become extremely nationalized, and everything is about what does Donald Trump like this week, and what Donald Trump likes this week changes week to week.
Right. I wrote a whole column about this whole question about if it's a cult. Like, one of the problems with Donald Trump is so I like political movements should be organized around ideas. Right, like you have a platform of ideas, whether maybe it's a single issue like guns are your thing or abortion's your thing or whatever, marriage equality is your thing, whatever it is, but it's organized around a set of ideas.
It's a nice thought,
right?
Maybe.
And not necessarily.
Maybe we'll give it a try sometime.
Right. So it's organized around ideas, and then the leaders of it are people who espouse effectively arguments in favor of those ideas. The Trump movement is something else, and I kind of zeroed in on recent comments on abortion, which set aside for a moment how you feel about abortion, right? Because I don't. My intent here is not to litigate that issue specifically. Obviously, for Republicans, being in favor of abortion bans is you're pro-life, like you're favor of them. Now you can make a political argument, but I mean you have Donald Trump out ripping Ron DeSantis for passing a 6-week abortion ban in Florida. And,
talking about like
and not just
a price of like a commodity of business, like it's weird how he's doing it.
But Donald Trump's not talking about it in like that's politically unwise, because I think Republicans are willing to listen to that, to say, listen, a total ban on abortion without any exceptions or everything is a political third rail. The voters aren't going to go for it. We need to be pragmatic about this stuff. that is an argument. Maybe not every Republican buys into it, but that's an argument that you could countenance. But I mean, you look at somebody like Dr. Oz, who ran for the Senate in Pennsylvania, who was skeptical of a 6-week abortion ban and got ripped by evangelical Christians over it, and ripped also by the Trump people. But now you have Donald Trump doing the exact same thing, and suddenly it's okay. And so the point I'm trying to make is the Trump movement is organized around a personality. It's not organized around ideas. It's not organized around an ideology or philosophy. It's organized around a mood, and the mood is set by primarily Donald Trump. And then you go down the ladder, and maybe it's Andrew Tate, Tucker Carlson.
And I'm sorry, but
that
brand of changing, it depends on what facts we believe, depending on who says it, has the flavor of authoritarianism. That is what, that's the definition. It's like it gets into propaganda.
It makes me think of like the Soviet Union. They have that famous picture where like a Soviet leader was like in the picture next to Stalin, but then he fell out of favor, so they just erased him. He was just gone. He was just gone out of the record.
Or it's more like the boarding reports the USSR would put out to its citizens saying, oh, that we're making the best wheat in the world, but they had no access to any other information. So they all had to believe it. But half of them were sitting there thinking, I don't think so. But if I say anything bad, I'm going to get
the state media is sending out, say, oh, the potato harvest was great. Meanwhile, you can't buy a potato anywhere.
Meanwhile, you're starving. Yeah.
Right. So,
is it exactly that? No, but it has
obviously it's not that bad.
But it has the flavor of that.
Right. I mean, that's what happens when political leaderships are organized around a person instead of I'm suddenly getting text messages here. They're organized around a person instead of ideas. That's not a political movement. That's not an ideology. That's not a philosophy. It's not even a political party. That is a cult of personality. And I'm afraid
the only way this goes away right now, the kind of culture that's creating a movement where an executive director who wanted to retire working for the GOP, it's just going to have to be what a forest fire is to an overly crowded forest. There's just going to have to be less of them elected, and for them to have to look in the mirror and say, I don't think this is what a majority of people want. Most importantly, what's the bottom line result of what we're doing right now? Because right now, I don't think there is a bottom line result they're striving towards. And therefore, to me, that's a giant waste of time. You have the blessing of self-governance, and you're not bothering to run to office to self-govern. That's a shame.
It's we don't have the time in this podcast, but I mean, part of what I'm thinking too is how many moderate Republicans who have been voting for people like John Hoeven and Jack Dalrymple and all these moderate Republican leaders, Doug Burgum, frankly, over the years, are looking at the state of the Republican Party right now and thinking, maybe I can find a home in the Democratic Party. And what is the Democratic Party doing in North Dakota to give those people a home, a place that they can come?
I will tell you, and this is being a Fargo guy, I know of plenty of non-politically active people who consider themselves to be generally Democrats that voted for Hoeven for a long time. And there's a reason that John Hoeven, I have never heard say an impolite thing in his entire life. I've never seen the man angry. I've only ever seen him at NDSU games or at press conferences with a smile on his face talking about how great North Dakota is. It's not hard right partisan stuff. And I think, to your point, I honestly think if like a Josh Boucher or Zach Issa comes and knocks on that person's door and they hear them talking about, frankly, some in the weeds policy point they made last time or about school lunches, and then they hear Sandi Sanford saying, let's ban books, I don't know that they're going to take a look at those
this sort of strident, like, we're not going to listen to any, it's, we don't care about paying for, like, I was articulating an argument in favor of the state paying for school lunches. I pointed out, as a father, I pay a lot more for school lunches than I do in state income taxes. You want to give me some tax relief, pay for the school lunches.
Not a radical point.
You know what? You know how much of a burden that is off a family? I mean, it's a couple $1,000s a year. That's not chump change. Depending on how many kids you have and stuff.
And I would say North Dakota Democrats need to work on getting more exposure for themselves, and that's partly their responsibility. It's partly a hard thing to do for anybody to do, especially when you're not throwing bombs. But I would say there's a lot of people, I'd say especially in, like, I've been to Chamber of Commerce, local Chamber of Commerce meetings in Fargo, where if you heard like a Kathy Hogan come up and say, my main concern, Senator Kathy Hogan's from downtown Fargo, say, I'm really concerned we don't have enough access to childcare, and I think there are things the state could do to improve ability to hire employees and get new parents their ability to childcare. You're not going to sit there and go like, wow, she sounds really crazy. What a San Francisco, that's pretty like, yeah, well, a lot of people have been talking about that. There's a lot of Republicans who are talking about that too. Who's got the bottom line plan that's going to create real results? I don't think the new ideology coming out of a wing that has created someone like Sam leaving her employment has an answer for something bread and butter like that issue.
It's interesting times. This is going to continue to unfold. We'll see what happens. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for listening. And by the way, coming up Friday, you probably heard there's a big lawsuit over North Dakota's gender care laws. The legislature passed some bills about surgeries and medicinal treatments. Now a family has sued. We're going to have the plaintiff from that case and one of the lawyers on the podcast Friday to talk that out, so be sure to tune in. Thank you for listening, and we will talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.